Some decades back, the superior oblique was described as noli tangere, which in Latin means do not touch. But with better knowledge and better visualization, this is no longer true. And I would say for superior oblique surgeries, handle with care. It is not a muscle which is to be operated when you start your strabismus surgery. You need to gain some experience with the with strabismus surgery before you handle the superior oblique muscle. The superior oblique surgeries are less commonly performed because superior oblique is the muscle which is most likely to be anomalous. We have seen that it could be attached at the sclera at not its normal position. It could be attached to the tenons. It could be attached to the superior rectus. I've seen a case where the superior oblique was attached on the superior surface of superior rectus with no scleral attachment, or there could be no superior oblique muscle itself. And they are unpredictable in their results. They require certain skill and expertise to perform. The approach is also difficult. Now, this is the surgical anatomy. I won't go into details. The diagram here is quite self-explanatory. We will go to the video which tells about the anatomy and physiology of the superior oblique muscle.
The superior oblique muscle attaches proximally to the lesser wing of the sphenoid bone, medial to the optic canal, courses anteriorly medial to the eyeball, turns posterolaterally at the trochlea, and attaches distally on the lateral posterior quarter of the eyeball. The muscle crosses the eyeball posterior to the superior inferior axis of the eyeball between it and the superior rectus muscle. Based on its attachments, the superior oblique depresses about the lateral medial axis, abducts about the superior inferior axis, and intorts about the visual gaze axis. The vector summation of these actions results in moving the visual gaze down and out. The superior oblique is innervated by the trochlear nerve, cranial nerve 4.
So that was about the action and the surgical anatomy of superior oblique muscle. We have many weakening and strengthening procedures on superior oblique. Some are full tendons, some are selective. So we'll be describing all the most of the procedures today. The weakening procedure I enlisted as well as strengthening. I would be covering the ones which are highlighted. And let's go further. Now, before we start any surgeries, we have to do an force junction test. But for superior oblique and inferior oblique, the oblique muscles, we need to do a exaggerated force junction test. So what is an exaggerated force junction test? We retropulse the eye, and then for superior oblique, they adduct it and elevate it while we are extorting the eyeball. So this is how it is done. The eyeball is retropulsed. In adduction, it is elevated and extorted, which tells us about the laxity or tightness of superior oblique muscle. It is advisable to do this test even at the end of the procedure. So it gives you an idea about what we want to achieve. The weakening procedures are indicated in A pattern deviation with overacting superior oblique muscle, the Brown syndrome with overacting superior oblique, that is Brown's plus, and it can be also done in torsional Kestenbaum surgery along with recession advancement of 4 obliques. This I have never tried. Now let's come to the weakening procedure. This is the procedure of loop myotomy or chicken suture. Before I start the video, I'll just like to give some introduction about the incision. I take a superior limbal incision on the nasal side, and after exposing the superior rectus muscle, it is hooked, and then we'll see it in the video now. So this is the superior rectus muscle, which is held on a muscle hook, and then on the nasal border of superior rectus muscle, we search for the superior oblique. There is a lot of tenons in this area, so it may take some time for us to hook the muscle. You can see the muscle hooked on the muscle hook. It is necessary to ensure that full tendon comes. It will on the nasal side because it is compact, as against on the temporal side where it is fanned out. So after hooking the muscle on the two muscle hooks, we take non-absorbable double-armed sutures. I'm using an 5-0 Ethibond, and it is a slightly slippery thread, so we need to take some more time and some more loops so that the knot remains there firmly. So after taking the first bite, about 2 to 3 millimeters away, a second bite is taken, and we make a loop of the Ethibond, which is approximately the amount we want to do. So in this cases, we had planned an 8 millimeters of loop tenotomy. So we are taking a circle which is approximately 4 millimeters. So it will enlarge to 8 millimeters. So after both the sides, the loops are made with a 5-0 non-absorbable. Then in between, the muscle is cut, taking care not to cut the loops. So this is how the muscle is cut in between the two ends. And you see now the two ends of the muscle are separated by about 8 millimeters, but they're still held together by the suture, which is an advantage over tenectomy, where it could be uncontrolled. This is more controlled procedure. Now, this child had alternate esotropia, and you can see that he had an under elevation in adduction and over depression in adduction again in both the eyes, resulting in a large A phenomena. You can see down gaze, there is very little ESO, and in up gaze, there is a significant esotropia. In this case was treated by bilateral medial rectus recession 5 millimeter with chicken suture loop myotomy of both the superior oblique muscles. These are the post-op photos showing the parallelism in all the gazes. So you can see that this procedure has, this was preoperative AESO. It was about 18 prism diopters in down gaze and 40 prism diopters in up gaze, which has corrected nicely after this procedure. Now the second procedure on superior oblique I'm going to describe is the posterior tenectomy of superior oblique. This is a selective weakening procedure, and here, since we are addressing the insertion of the muscle, I take an incision lateral to the superior rectus muscle. A vertical incision is taken along the side of superior rectus muscle. See how the incision is made, and then the hook is passed and the superior rectus is hooked from the temporal to the nasal side, and the dissection is made along the temporal border of superior rectus muscle. Here, let me tell you one thing, that it is a very thin muscle at the insertion. So you have to be careful because any ungentle movement can destroy the tendon. I generally use an iris retractor to lift up the muscle, and here we are removing the anterior 1/3 portion. We know that the anterior 1/3 portion is responsible for intorsion, and here in this procedure we are removing a block of posterior 7/8 or posterior 2/3 fibers of superior oblique, which are responsible for depression. One has to take care that all the posterior most fibers also are cut, and otherwise the effect of the procedure will not come. We cut a wedge of muscle with the apex at the superomedial border of the orbit, and then the muscle is cut and ensuring that no posterior fibers are remaining. This procedure reduces the A phenomena which is there associated with overaction of superior oblique muscle, and this procedure reduces about 15 prism diopters of A phenomena. Now, coming to the strengthening procedures, they are indicated in paralysis of fourth nerve or supraoblique muscle. For generalized strengthening of superior oblique, the tuck is a favorite procedure. It is mainly done in cases of congenital superior oblique palsies with a lax muscle, and for selective strengthening, the Harada-Ito and its modifications are used. This procedure strengthens the intorsion. So first, we'll have a look at the tuck. Now this tuck normally I do from the nasal side, but in this case the muscle was not seen on the nasal side, so I approached it from temporal and then went on to the nasal side to hook the muscle. Since it is a lax muscle, it comes on your muscle hook easily. I don't use a tendon tucker. Normally I do a tuck of about 10 to 12 millimeters. So we'll put sutures at roughly 6 millimeters. So it doubles out to be 12 millimeters. We use a non-absorbable suture. After applying one suture, I try and do a force junction test to see whether it is very tight, and it should not, because if it is too much, then it will cause acquired Browns. Some people suture this loop to the sclera, but I leave it like that because it is thought that suturing of the loop to the sclera could increase the chances of iatrogenic Browns. So when we do a force junction, the inferior limbus should cross the midline. Then we know that it's not very tight muscle. Now I'll be describing the selective strengthening of selective strengthening procedure, which is known as Harada-Ito procedure, and it's a modified Harada-Ito procedure. Again, since I'm operating on the insertion, I take a temporal approach, and after hooking the superior rectus and identifying the superior rectus, the anterior 1/3 fibers are taken on the repositor and dissected for about 15 millimeters, and the slip is attached with 260 vicryl, and this is then attached to the superior border of lateral rectus about 8 millimeters from its insertion. Some use non-absorbable sutures for it, and even adjustable Harada-Ito is possible, but I have not used an adjustable one till now. So this was a case, as you can see, it's a traumatic right superior oblique palsy. Pre-operatively, she had a trauma in 2011 and came to me in 2015 with symptomatic diplopia. Yeah, you can see there is small amount of exotropia. She had about 12 to 14 prism diopters of exotropia with a similar amount of hypertropia, and this hypertropia is increasing in the left gaze, and there is an overaction of inferior oblique muscle and underaction of superior oblique muscle. So this was the Hess chart showing an underaction of superior oblique and overaction of inferior oblique muscle, and x-cyclodeviation of 10 degrees. So we did a right lateral rectus recession with right inferior oblique recession with Harada-Ito to right superior oblique, and the exotropia reduced, and her hypertropia in the left gaze also reduced. and she was symptomatically much better. So take-home messages: superior oblique surgeries can be performed selectively to weaken or strengthen its intortor or depressor power. Properly performed surgery gives gratifying results. And thanks for a patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Shubhangi. It was an excellent presentation, excellent videos which were demonstrated. There are two questions from the audience. There are two questions. The first one is like, did you take a swan incision for the PTSO?
No, it was a incision, paralimbal, no, it was a vertical incision at the side of superior rectus muscle.
You said that at the beginning, that was a vertical incision.
Yes.
You said that during your video.
Yes.
And the other one is what we always face, because I think you prefer, like I would like to know, there are two options for A pattern. One is the post-retinectomy of the superior oblique, and the other is the chicken suture. You mostly prefer the chicken suture for your A patterns. And so do you have any specific indications? And do you have any specific indications? Because there's a question like, we do a PTSO, still there's some residual remaining. So what to do next?
So PTSO corrects up to 15 prism diopters of A phenomena. So if the A phenomena is more, as in my case, it was up to 25 prism diopters. So we need to do a stronger weakening procedure. So in those cases, I would prefer a chicken suture or a spacer. A spacer gives you a more definite lengthening.
Okay.
More controlled.
So I think the other question is, do you titrate the length of the loop in various grades of A pattern?
Yes, it is like, I do it as I do the spacer. 5, 6, 7, 8. 5 is for grade 1 and 8 is for grade 4.
Okay. So, what the take-home message is, you prefer, if there's a large A pattern, to do a chicken suture and a spacer, whereas PTSO is mainly when there's a small A pattern.
Yes.
And maybe if there is no torsion associated with it, so maybe then we could do a PTSO. But then there are controversies to even that is it really required PTSO in such cases? Maybe just shifting might help the muscles. Yeah.
Sometimes one has to have a superior oblique overaction to reduce it. So if it is associated with superior oblique overaction, then we do the procedures. There could be many other reasons for A phenomenon.
So I have a question like superior oblique recession. Do you like to do it, or when do you prefer a superior oblique recession?
I've never done a superior oblique recession, for the simple reason that the breadth is fanned out so much that normally in the recession we have to maintain the width of the insertion. The superior oblique fans around 11 to 12 millimeters. So technically it is difficult to do a recession. And even if we plan to do it, then we have to do a hangback. I have never done a recession.
Okay. The other question is, if there was a tuck, if you're doing a superior oblique tuck, do you prefer in all cases? What are specific indications for the tuck?
I do it only when there is a laxity of the tendon. If on the force junction I feel that the tendon is lax, then only I do a tuck. Otherwise, then I would do a contralateral inferior rectus.
So you prefer that to the, because there are a lot of papers and there are a lot of studies which say that instead of the tuck, which you are scared will cause a Brown's, you could do the inferior rectus recession of these contralateral eye and nasal transposition of the inferior rectus of the same eye to take care of your extortion.
That depends on.
You have tried that, or?
I do inferior rectus recessions also, but if it is a lax tendon, then I feel tuck gives good results.
Okay. Any more? There are no more questions. I think I would ask Dr. Laila Mohan to share her screen. And so before, when she's sharing a screen, do you prefer a nasal or a temporal approach in any particular conditions, like you like a nasal and a temporal?
Operating on the insertion, I prefer a temporal approach. And whenever I'm operating on the tendon as in tuck or chicken suture or spacer, I prefer a nasal approach.
So that means because we mostly, all of us are mostly doing PTSOs and tenectomies, or all we prefer the temporal approach. The nasal approach, sometimes what happens is that the nasal approach, sometimes you do not get the superior oblique as easily as you get in the temporal approach.
But
so,
then if you can get on the nasal, you can go from temporal to the nasal, trace the muscle as I had done in that case of tuck.
Yeah, so we'll have Dr. Laila demonstrating to us that also, how to, if in case you do not get it by the nasal method, how to go temporal. So I would now like to invite the next speaker, Dr. Laila. She is the surgeon and clinician par excellence, and she also has more than 30 years of experience. And she is the HOD of Home Trust Eye Hospital, Calicut, Kerala. I would like her to speak on the other superior oblique surgeries, but she would also be talking again of the Harada-Ito surgery, in her hands, how it is working. You will have to unmute yourself, Dr. Okay, now.
Okay. Now, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Unmuted. Now it is unmuted. Oh, a warm good evening to all of you. So it was a wonderful presentation, Dr. Subhangi. Nice videos too. So we are talking about superior oblique surgery is demystified. So the mystery and challenges are because sometimes it is misdiagnosed also, the ocular torticollis, whether it is due to an ocular cause itself or due to something else. The abnormal head posture, double vision, asthenopia are the more significant issues rather than the squinting as such. And even a small vertical deviation of 3 to 5 prisms are disproportionately symptomatic in acquired, and excyclotorsion can produce asthenopia, discomfort in reading, and even near work in job, they cannot do their continue with their job. And so precision is very important since vertical fusional vergences are very less. And as we all know, the commonest paralytic strabismus is superior oblique paralysis, but then you have to look for it because sometimes it may not be so obvious unless you abolish the abnormal head posture, you may not see it also. So as we all know, you have to take it for granted that all vertical strabismus are superior oblique paralysis, and unless proved otherwise, and if it is superior oblique palsy, it is usually congenital unless it is proven otherwise, and if not, traumatic. So this child, you can see there is a marked, there is a very little head posture, abnormal head posture. There is a flattening of face on the, so the telltale signs are there when you look at the boy. And there is not much of a deviation unless you correct the head posture. When you corrected the head posture, then see that hypertropia comes. So that is where the mystery is in the first stage. And then comes when to do a surgery. When once you have diagnosed congenital superior oblique palsy, this child, you can see there is a right head tilt, and the classic features 3-step test, and left superior oblique palsy is there. And we have found that we used to measure the from the canthal, lateral canthus to the angle of the mouth distance on both sides. And we have found that the facial asymmetry and the head posture can be abolished if you do it early enough. The midway facial hypoplasia persists if you take these children later in life. So it's earlier the better. So because of the large fusional vergences, they go on for some time and then decompensate later. And we all know that most of the cases, about 80% of them, this is the traction test, as Dr. Subhangi has already shown. The 80% of them, the hypertrophy is maximum in inferior oblique field. So inferior oblique recession may be enough. But when you do a second surgery, when it is more than 20 prisms, then you have to think of which eye to be tackled, which muscle to be tackled. That is the next dilemma. So the spread of comitants, as already pointed out, can be seen whether there is a post-duction positive for superior rectus, then you can do superior rectus recession, and superior oblique tendon laxity is there means then you have to do a tendon tuck. And force duction test, which eye is the fixing eye? Sometimes it so happens that the paretic eye is the fixing eye, the other eye is hypotropic. In those cases, you can tackle the other inferior rectus. Otherwise, it's always better to tackle the same eye. So this is a 17-year-old who came, 17-year-old girl who came during the entrance examination with a lot of problems with reading, diplopia, eye strain, and we found there was a superior oblique paralysis with maximum hypertrophy in the field of superior oblique, and the tendon was very lax on table, and we did you have already seen the tendon tuck procedure. And as pointed out, there can be an iatrogenic, if tendon was not lax before surgery, iatrogenic Brown's can occur, as already pointed out. So acquired, mostly it is a traumatic superior oblique palsy, and intolerable torsional diplopia is the main problem with which they approach us. And as has been this has been already shown that Haradite toe. You can see in this picture, a subtle chin down posture is all that is there. And quite often any hypertrophy is missed, and you have to be very carefully looking for the head tilt test and look for a bilateral head tilt test also if there is an alternating hypertrophy in left and right eye, because that may be the only sign to point out the once you get a superior oblique palsy, you are happy that you have found out something in this patient who has a lot of symptoms but no real squint. So subtle head tilt, disproportionate symptoms, vertical deviation is almost nil in primary position, and VET, esotropia, especially from primary position to depression, with a more or 10 degree or more extortion by Maddox rod test, subjective or by fundus examination, then you have to think highly of a bilateral. Otherwise, it will be a mass bilateral. After doing surgery in one eye, you will end up with a head tilt to the other side in the so you. Dr. Suma, should I go ahead with this?
Yes. Yeah.
So
The
you have
more we see the better.
Any laxity. If you need to do a complete superior oblique strengthening, this is hooking of the superior rectus tendon. This is quite an old video. The fanning fibers of the superior oblique can be seen, and we need only the anterior 1/3 to half of the superior oblique. 1/3 is enough, but sometimes you get a little more fibers so that you get a good grip on either side of the muscle edges. So it's I also use 60 Vicryl. You can take those sutures on either side of the muscle. This one I had done with a single suture, but it's always better to do on either side, because two double-armed ones, then you can do an adjustable as well. And then on the table itself, you can look for the torsion and whether the torsion has been corrected, whether the adjustable, you can tighten it then and there or not. So this is the lateral rectus. Delineate the lateral rectus and hook it just to see the upper border and mark the 8 millimeters behind the upper edge of the lateral rectus. Take the scleral bite. And then the most important thing is when you pull, the muscle should not tear through. Sometimes it can tear through if you pull very hard. So slowly, in stages, steps, you have to use another instrument to bring the anterior fibers, the intorting fibers towards the upper border of the lateral rectus, 8 millimeters away from the insertion. Sometimes you have to go in stages. Don't pull it so that it slips through. And then that is the strengthening anteriorizing and lateralizing fibers of the anterior intorting fibers of the superior oblique. The classic Haradite toe is without disinserting. The muscle is difficult to pull towards this side. I have tried Wells modification is easier. This is the Wells modification, and you may do an adjustable as well. And this patient, you can see a carpenter who did not work for about 4 to 5 years came to me that his lines on the planks of wood are going slanting. And then after there was a very subtle head tilt only, very little hypertrophy was there. And following Hardito surgery in left eye, his diplopia completely disappeared. It's a very, very gratifying surgery because it doesn't show up much, and the bystanders, I mean the companion who brings the patient, they are not quite sure whether it is a serious problem, whether the patient is bluffing. So this is a gratifying surgery. So overactions of superior oblique, as already shown by Dr. Subhangi. So superior oblique sheath syndrome is the commonest problem. You can see there is a Y pattern here in primary position, and depression there is not much of an exo, just exo in elevation only. Left, there is a marked chin up position with a right face turn and left browns. So these are the options, tenotomy and Z-tenotomy. All these are not controlled ones because after surgery you cannot revise it. So superior oblique split tendon lengthening, spacers with either silicone band, and as you have seen the chicken suture as advised by Knapp can be titrated later and is reversible too. So here I am, this is just to show the exposure of superior oblique nasally. As Dr. Suma has pointed out, it is not so easy to get the, that is the traction, that is the force adduction test for upper nasal, for adduction. Elevation in adduction is restricted in this case. So I am trying to fix the eye and expose it upper nasal, in the upper nasal quadrant between the superior rectus and the medial rectus. So as and when you open up the tenons, you can see a shining band going towards the superior rectus, and that if you miss sometimes, then you cannot get the muscle later, the tendon later, because once you have disturbed the tissue, then you can see that glistening white pearly structure there, that you have to keep an eye on. Once you see that, before you pick it, if you dissect more, then you have to go temporal and come nasally, as Dr. Subhangi has already shown. This is the about 3 millimeters away from the medial border of the superior rectus is where you will do all these procedures, and so that there will not be a lot of additions to the superior rectus. So that is the superior rectus dissected from the upper nasal quadrant. So now this is the this is another case. In every case, you have to look for the force reduction test, how tight it is, the muscle. And sometimes, as you may have already seen in the WSPOS meeting, sometimes it may give way also. So it's always good to do a force reduction test. You must do a force. So now, because I couldn't find the muscle in the upper nasal quadrant, I am going temporally, and then you can see the fanning fibers on the temporal side. It is easy to make out. Once you see 2 or 3 times, then it is not difficult. Then you trace it medially under the superior rectus, as you have seen, and then where the tendon becomes more rounded towards the nasal quadrant, that is the penetrating fibers of the penetrating the Steenan's capsule. So there you can hook the muscle. Now you are in the nasal side. So initial stages, if you don't get it in the nasal, upper nasal quadrant, you can go from the temporal to nasal. But so this child had a marked chin up posture with a restriction of elevation in adduction Brown syndrome, right Browns with a marked chin up and face turn to the left. So we did a Brown superior oblique sheath syndrome in this child. So you can see that this force reduction is severely positive. It was almost like a Brown plus they don't use this terminology nowadays. That is almost, there was a hypotropia. So I used a reasonably large silicon band in this case. So this is our upper quadrant between the superior rectus and the medial rectus. And if you look carefully, you can see that shiny pearly white tendon of superior oblique. See there, you shouldn't miss that fibers. Once you miss it and disturb the other tissues, that pearly white tissue cannot be recognized. So that is the superior oblique tendon. And you clamp it with an artery forceps and take sutures on either sides, and in between you suture the silicon band. That's what you are going to do. I use a 5-0-proline for the same. And then after you have made the sutures, place the sutures on one side, you can cut the muscle and suture the silicon band. This is an 8 millimeter I had planned. So after suturing it, I try to put it in such a way that the sutures go between the silicon band and the muscle, so it doesn't rub on either the sclera or the conjunctiva. So chances of erosion are now see that you have to see hooking the superior rectus, whether it is placed well underneath the superior rectus with no tightness anywhere. Now see that it is free. See, that is this child came with head tilt towards the left, head tilt towards the right side, showing a superior oblique underaction. So this was after 3 years after surgery, and I took her up for an exploration and shortening of the silicon band. And silicon band could be easily found out and explored. We took a muscle bite, and then half of the silicon band was cut, and then the muscle was resutured to the cut end, and it is placed again under the superior rectus, well underneath that pocket. And there was not much of additions, I must say. I have not had problems with extrusion or erosion of the band. So consecutive superior oblique underaction was well managed with the shortening of the silicon band. And this child came with no head tilt is there after shortening of the silicon band, and was completely cured of the underaction. And at the end of surgery, you have to again look for, there was a very minimal post-duction positive, but that is okay because there is no head tilt now. Superior oblique overaction, you have already seen. There is no need for PTA, so you have seen a beautiful video, isn't it? So I think I will go ahead, isn't it, Suma, Dr. Suma?
Yes, yeah.
So to summarize, the strengthening procedures, like already shown, full strengthening of superior oblique by tucking should be done only if the traction test is positive. Otherwise, you will produce an iatrogenic Browns. And the anterior intorting fibers can be strengthened by Haradalto. Weakening procedures, better to do always a titrable and reversible procedure to prevent iatrogenic superior oblique palsy, which produces more symptoms than Browns, and spacers with silicon band or chicken suture, or a split tendon lengthening. Also, the length can be decided according to whether it is severe enough to or not. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Laila, for an excellent presentation. There are not many questions, so I think I will ask some few questions. The question is like, you prefer now, what are the indications that you prefer a band, and which do you prefer a chicken suture? Like most of us like chicken suture better than band. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I have got into the habit of using silicone band. Mostly I do silicone band. And PTS, of course, for A pattern, I don't do band routinely. And if there is a larger than 20 prism A pattern, then I, in addition to the superior oblique, I do a displacement of the lateral rectus. If it's an exo or ESO, accordingly, if you are tackling the lateral rectus, usually there is an in A pattern, usually you are doing a horizontal muscle surgery as well. So in those cases, in addition to the, there was a question about if it was more than, if there is a remaining
yes, so there's the remaining PTI, so there's still
so
remaining A
yes,
pattern.
if it is more than 20 prisms, I definitely do an additional displacement of both lateral recti when there is a lateral rectus recession done.
Okay, so you would go back if there is a residual A pattern, you would say you would go back and do a
No,
displacement of the lateral rectus, or would you?
On the same sitting, if it is more than 20 prisms.
Yes, so I think we should do in the same sitting. If we find that if it is more than 15 to 20 prisms, along with the PTSO, we should also shift the horizontal muscles if there is associated horizontal deviations. Of course, most of the time they are associated. And when do you exactly do a Harada Ito? Because we do not see much patients coming with for the Harada Ito procedure. Maybe we have missed, or any maybe a bilateral trauma case, maybe we have missed, or maybe the small, we think, okay, just a small vertical squint, should we go in and operate, just give them some amount of prisms?
Over the years, that is what I have felt, that quite often it is very difficult even to show the PGs whether there is a hypertropia. You have to keep watching, looking for a hypertropia, whether it is there at all. So the main thing is torsion. So we have started into the practice of looking for torsion in every case. And if there is a torsion, and if the patient is symptomatic, definitely it's a very gratifying surgery, and that is what has made me do more of them. Because especially when they are symptomatic, and they go on with it for a very long time, because nobody has touched the muscle or nobody has advised that this is the problem. So quite often they come to us very late. Of course, we wouldn't be doing it within 6 months to 1 year. We would wait if there is a traumatic superior oblique palsy. If there is an improvement, of course you should wait. But if there is no improvement, the patient comes again after 2 or 3 months, again and again, with the same issues and problems, you have to go ahead with the surgery.
So if it's a bilateral superior oblique palsy, and there's also a horizontal V-esotropia and down gaze.
Yes.
So what will you do? Only the Harada Ito, or you would add something to it? Because that is a problem which we have normally.
Quite often in superior oblique palsy with the torsional problems, I have seen patients are completely cured by just doing Harada Ito only. And bilateral, as they say, it is 25%, that means about 1/4. But I have not seen so many of them. I have done bilateral. But of course, just the Harada Ito alone will correct.
Can I
There's
add
a question.
Can I add one thing?
Yes, yes.
So if in such cases, one has to rely on Hess charting also. If there is an underacting direction of superior oblique, tackle the superior oblique. If there is an associated inferior oblique overaction, one has to do even that.
Yes, that is true. You have to do the full evaluation. And but just Harada Ito or not, you will decide after the torsion evaluation. And also, if there is a hypertropia which is remaining after your Harada Ito, I have done mini tenotomy. Mini tenotomy of the superior, graded mini tenotomy as advised by Scott. From the temporal side, you can do it under the under topical anesthesia. Just do a mini tenotomy, so that it is the hypertrophy is not much actually. To do a proper muscle recession or resection is not advisable, because it will definitely overcorrect the hypertrophy. So it's always good to do a graded GVRT, graded vertical rectus tenotomy under topical, if at all. I have had very few occasions where I have had to do a second procedure after Harada Ito. But of course, definitely you have to make the patient understand it is mainly for the torsion you are doing it. And as you know, I was so happy with this carpenter patient, whom you would think it is not a very big problem to have a small head tilt. But he could not work for a whole 4 years. And the wife was so happy that he started working, and she was thinking he was not really having any real issue.
Okay, there's a question I'll just pick up one question. In the meanwhile, Sovita can keep her case ready. That can inferior oblique recession correct the torsion? He's written for a case of superior oblique paresis. Any of you can answer that?
For exotropia, we have seen after surgery, the exotropia.
No, for a SO palsy, he's saying. Okay.
For SOP, but just inferior oblique recession alone, usually the torsional component, inferior oblique recession is done mainly for the hypertropia in the lateral gaze, opposite gaze, which corrects only the hypertropia.
Yes, I would agree. If there is also associated hypertropia more in down gaze, then either it is preferable to do an inferior rectus or it is preferable to do a superior oblique tuck. So it is so important to measure where is your incompetency. I rely totally on more than a Hess chart. I rely on the measurements. See whether it's in primary position, in side gazes where it is more, or whether it's down gaze it is more. Especially in a case of superior oblique palsy, because we all know NAPS 5 classifications, and all the NAPS, like mostly only NAPS 2 where you're going to do the superior oblique tuck mostly when it is more in the down gaze. But the superior oblique palsy does not come out as a clear case as only a superior oblique palsy, like just an inferior oblique recession. There might be a deviation which is more. There might be that the down gaze it is more. It might be more in the opposite gaze. It might be more in the ipsilateral gaze, like when there is a superior rectus contracture, or it might be more in up gaze. So depending on that, we have all the different options which are available for surgery, whether you do an IO recess or along with that IR recess, the contralateral, or you would do a superior oblique tuck, or you would do an inferior rectus of the other eye. So there are many options in a superior oblique palsy. So I think it has been nicely covered.
Caution, when doing an inferior rectus, we have to separate the inferior palpebral ligament nicely. Otherwise, there would be a recession of the lower lid, and there is a pseudo hypertropia appearance of the eye where we have done inferior rectus resection.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Laila, for an excellent presentation. Now I would request Sovita. We would have 3 cases. I would start with Sovita presenting the first case. Dr. Sovita is a pediatric ophthalmologist and a strabismologist at Dr. Shroff Charity Eye Hospital. She's also in charge of the neuro-ophthalm department at Shroff Hospital. She would be presenting her case I think let's not give the clue of the case. You can present the case.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'ams, for that live surgical tutorial, which we just heard and saw. And I am sure our DNBs and fellows would have understood superior oblique better, because that is always an area where we fumble during our fellowship or residency. So this is a case, but managed by some, I think, an old-fashioned approach. And I would seek the opinion of all the people attending here, like how could they could have managed it better. So basically a 9-year-old female presented to our clinic where the parents complained that she had a right face turn and an outward deviation of left eye for the last 2 years. On examination, the visual acuity in both eyes were 20/20 N6 with a small refraction of plus 0.5 diopter sphere. Sensory examination, she had BSB on WFDT and stereopsis was 400 seconds of arc. As we see, she had a right face turn of 15 degrees. And on motility evaluation, we see on dextroversion, there is superior oblique overaction of 2+ in the left eye and 1+ in the right eye in the levo version, which is further confirmed in the levo elevation and the levo depression and the dextro depression gazes. These are the cover test measurements. On Hirschberg, she was LXT of 15 degrees, but on cover test, we got measurements as 20 prism diopters exotropia with a 5 left hypotropia, which changed to 20 prism diopters of exotropia on dextroversion with 5 LHOT and 8 prism diopters of exotropia in left gaze with 6 prism diopters of left hypotropia. On Abge's measurement was 14 prism diopters of exotropia that increased to 40 prism diopters of exotropia with a 10 prism diopters of left hypotropia. There was not much change in the right and left tilt, and in the near, she had 16 prism diopters of exotropia with 3 left hypotropia. Correlating to the superior oblique overaction on fundus examination, we found grade 2 intorsion in the left eye and grade 1 intorsion in the right eye. So just based on this, a diagnosis of simple hyperopia with the A pattern exotropia was there with superior oblique overaction with a compensatory head posture. But to remember, the head posture was neither a chin up down or a head tilt. So with this findings of superior oblique overaction, a large A pattern of 26 prism diopters and fundus torsion, we thought we would go ahead with a traction test followed by a asymmetric bilateral superior oblique tenectomy, and without touching the horizontal recti, assuming that superior oblique would correct some amount of exotropia also. So I've just shown the traction test of one eye, but the traction test in both the eyes was negative for superior oblique, as we are seeing here. And then we approached it with a superotemporal fornix approach. Superior rectus was hooked, and as discussed before, the glistening fibers were seen, and superior oblique was then hooked. Superior oblique is hooked carefully, all adhesions released and is then stretched. And then a 9 millimeter, this is the right eye which we operated, 9 millimeter marking is done. And then this 9 millimeter segment is cut between these two markings. So as we cut carefully, we also see that towards the insertion, we have just left 1 mm of stump, and the conjunctival closure is then done. Similarly, in the left eye, a 13 millimeter of tenectomy was done. We did not touch any horizontal recti, but to our dilemma, it was always there with whether with this much we would be able to correct the face turn or not. One thing which I would also like to explain here, that in this procedure, we used also the limbal marking, which has been explained by Holmes et al. In one of his papers, where we marked 2 markings with a sterile marking pen, one at the limbus and one at 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock position pre-operatively after induction of anesthesia. And we checked for any change in torsion by the change in clock hours of this marking, which is seen post-operatively. There was change in 1 clock hour. That means there was a change in the torsion. So intorsion had changed to extorsion. So now we see here the 6 weeks follow-up. At this point of time, she had no fixation preference. Hirschberg was central, and these are her cover test measurements. We see that the motility has also improved. There's no superior oblique overaction in any eye. The A pattern of 26 prism diopters has collapsed. BSV remains, and stereopsis is 400 seconds of arc. To our surprise, the head posture has also changed. Now she has maybe a very small, less than 5 degrees of right face turn. The fundus torsion had also gone. So just to add that this is a review of literature, that there are many authors who have advocated that for a pattern in downward gaze, only superior oblique tenectomy alone is sufficient to correct this much of angle, ranging from 40, say 20 to 45 prism diopters of difference. And those were old papers, but in 2019 also, this is a paper which has been published where they have compared 3 superior oblique weakening procedures, those being tenectomy, hangback recession, and suture spacers. And the angle, they had 24 patients, and each group they had taken 8 patients each. Most of the patients had A pattern exotropia. And we see that the deviation also pre-op was not different in the 3 groups, neither was post-op. Even they said that the torsion was not different, did not change significantly pre and post-op. So all of these 3 superior oblique weakening procedures were effective for correcting A pattern strabismus and fundus intorsion. So this case, because we found it was rare and the face turn got corrected as well as the A pattern of collapse, we tried publishing it, and finally it got published in DJO. With this, I would conclude and just try to discuss or take the opinion of experts here, that what was the reason for the face turn in this case, and would PTSO be a better option, which in view of the smaller degree of superior oblique overaction and the child had fusion pre-op. Mostly because the child had fusion, would we still think that PTSO could have corrected, though we just saw in discussions that PTSO corrects a smaller A pattern of 15 prism diopters. Thank you.
Maybe we could ask Dr. Shubhangi and Dr. Laila, would I think nobody, I don't think they favor superior oblique tinectomy. So what would you have done?
Only thing is it's a very good result, and tinectomy is a strong procedure and can correct up to 40 prism diopters of A exotropia. But only thing is ki in the down gaze, these children later can develop a palsy of superior oblique. So we have to look for that carefully. And even in the post-op photos, I was feeling that post-operatively in the down gaze, the superior oblique was slightly underacting, and that would create problem if the patient has a binocular vision. So I feel that tinectomy should be avoided.
Maybe in an amblyopic eye.
Yeah, definitely yes.
There's no binocular.
Amblyopia, there is no, you can go do away with.
We can do it.
But then reversible procedure is always safe when there is a binocularity. She showed about 400 degree of stereopsis, so good binocularity is there. But then, as you have already shown, all these three procedures have shown more or less equal results in many hands. So I would say that still I would prefer a reversible procedure like a spacer or PTSO, but then asymmetrical. Definitely left hypo means you can do more in one eye and less in the other eye.
So how would you grade the PTSO? Because in that case,
No,
if
PTSO
you cannot
really great. PTSO is usually
like we do around 8 mil, like
yes, more or less same.
Yeah.
But
chicken suture.
Grade PTSO.
Yes, so we would do a chicken suture maybe.
Yes,
so
we can do those procedures, and only thing what I can't understand is how the primary position 20 prism diopter exotropia was corrected. Down gaze exotropia we can understand, but the primary position also was corrected, and I felt that superior oblique overaction was more than grade 1 and grade, because to create that much of A has to be more overaction.
Okay. Yeah, but it was surprising that it got corrected. But what do you think is the ideal procedure? Because we should not, the take-home message should not be to do a superior oblique tinectomy always. So what is the ideal procedure?
I would prefer a chicken suture or a spacer in such a case.
Okay. So because there is a fear, as rightly said by Dr. Reena, that there is a fear of superior oblique palsy, and also Dr. Shubhangi has highlighted that we could get later on a superior oblique palsy. So I think a chicken suture. So how would you grade it? Means that's something which I always found, like suppose if you have asymmetric, have you grade, like you have put in one, how much chicken suture in one and how much?
You can put different measurements in two eyes, depending on grade. Okay. So if it is grade 2 in right eye, I use 6 millimeters. If it is grade 4 in left eye, I use 8 millimeters. So it goes 5, 6, 7, 8. Grade 5 is for grade 1 and 8 is for grade 4.
I think Shailaja can upload her presentation. I think Dr. Shashikant also says that tinectomy should be avoided. He rightly says that large patterns, so is superior oblique tinectomy is unguided missile. So that's perfect word. I think we should. But it gave a good result because we thought, how do we? Because it was asymmetric and it gave a good result. But yes, we should be careful.
I would also suggest that you look for the if we don't routinely do an MRI to look for fully heterotopia, but then if there is a lateral rectus which is coming from below, then you can always do a displacement as well. So some of these cases they show the anatomical direction of the lateral rectus is definitely there is an extortion of the globe. So then you can do a downward intorsion actually in A pattern. So then you can do a downward displacement of the lateral rectus if you are going to do a lateral rectus. That is. But without touching the horizontal muscle, I am really the results are very good.
Yes. I mean, suppose now later on they develops a superior oblique palsy, what would you be your next strategy? Suppose if it like mostly it will develop in another 2 or 3 years.
Again, I think you have to look for
Public.
you have to look for all these where the hypertrophy is maximum. Is it the inferior?
The same way, okay.
Yeah, same way out.
Okay. So I think Shailaja will next present her case.
Penectomy, for that matter, initially it used to be done always along with an inferior oblique resection. So that the
yeah. So that you do not get, yes. So that you are already preparing yourself for a superior oblique palsy.
So thank you again for this opportunity. Wonderful discussions have been happening so far. My case is a very unusual case of superior oblique palsy. Came as a surprise to me. So this patient presented with a 3 months history of outward deviation noticed by parents. However, the child had been adopting a head posture, which was noticed in the past few years by the parents. He was having normal milestones. The best corrected visual acuity was around 20/30 in the right eye and 20/20 in the left eye with a small myopia. And he had a stereo acuity of 40 seconds of arc with the HP, but it was absent on the forced primary position deviation. So these are the 9-gaze photographs which show that there was a 25% diopters of exotropia, which was intermittent, so not apparent in this photograph. But there was a hypotropia of the right eye. The left eye was the habitually fixing eye for the child. However, on ductions, you could note that the left eye was actually becoming hypertropic during dextroversion and dextro elevation. It was also slight overaction or elevation was more in straight ahead gaze and in levo elevation. Apart from that, there was some limitation of depression reduction, which was also in other down gazes as well. The tilts measurement showed an obvious increase in the deviation of the right hypotropia or the left hypertropia in the left tilt, which is to the same side of the left eye, and it was decreasing on the right tilt. There was a mild facial asymmetry. He had a he had an obvious V pattern and had a head tilt to the right side. This head tilt was not going completely with occlusion of either of the one eye. So this was a clear-cut case of left eye congenital esopalsy. Probably he had been fusing, so the vertical deviation was not apparent so much to the parents. So the plan was to do a intraoperative traction test and FDT, and based on that, go ahead with the procedures as explained in the previous talks. And apart from that, do a bilateral LR recession, 6 millimeters for the exotropia. So the traction test was first performed in the affected eye, which is the left eye. The superior rectus was not tight. The superior oblique was quite lax. I could not feel it much, although slightly I could still feel it. But I thought, oh, it's lax, since probably I would have to go ahead and do a tuck in this case. The inferior oblique was not tight. The right eye superior oblique, to my surprise, was also lax in this patient. So now I was thinking that whether the left eye is also kind of normal for this child, because in the right eye, there was no underaction of the superior oblique or overaction of the inferior oblique. Anyways, I decided to go ahead with a tuck, but what I saw is that I could not find the superior oblique on the temporal side of the superior rectus. So I usually use the temporal approach and just hook it a little bit there and then come to the nasal side. So I could not find it. So I thought maybe it's an absent SO tendon which I was dealing with. Although on the FDT or the traction test, I was feeling a little bit of superior oblique, so I thought maybe I should find it on the medial side. And yes, I could see that glistening belly of the muscle, or the glistening tendon of the muscle, sorry, and I could isolate it, and it was not attaching to the, this is how you can see it's attaching to the superior rectus, in fact, with some adhesions, and the superior rectus sheath is kind of all opened up in order to dissect it, and you can see here the course of the tendon coming from the superior middle aspect of the orbit and attaching on to the superior rectus muscle here. I could not find attachment of the superior oblique to in any part, like even a minimal attachment to the superior, to the globe as such, to the sclera. So neither on the temporal side nor inferior to the superior rectus or on the medial side. It was completely attaching to the superior rectus medially to the medial border of the superior rectus, around 8 millimeters behind the insertion of the superior rectus. So I isolated the muscle took sutures at this junction with the superior rectus and then detached it from the superior rectus. It was not very lax here. I could pull it just beyond the superior rectus for a few millimeters and attached it to its normal anatomical position where it could be. But of course, a fan could not be created here. So this is around 8 to 9 millimeters behind the lateral border of the superior rectus that the muscle was attached. And post attachment, the superior oblique was still lax, but it was similar to the other side. So thinking that we have just created it back to the anatomical position, maybe it was not enough for the amount of hypotropia of the patient or the hypertrophy of the left eye. So we also did a IO recession here of 4:1 along with the bilateral lateral rectus recession. Post-operatively in the primary position, the hypotropia had almost gone, right hypotropia. In fact, the left was slightly hypo. And the inferior oblique overaction, as you can see, is totally gone. However, in fact, there is an elevation limitation. This is only 1 month post-op photograph. The elevation limitation was more in adduction, and rest positions it was little less. The superior oblique overaction, underaction, which was seen there before, is now totally gone, and superior oblique is now acting almost like normally in this patient. The head posture had also reduced a little bit, but not totally abolished. So we are waiting more follow-ups of this patient to see how he has done. This elevation limitation adduction could be because of scarring also because there was manipulation, and or it could be a little bit of inferior oblique effect of the additive effect of the inferior oblique weakening. So the question to the panel is that would you have managed this case differently? And even the participants in the chat room can let us know if anyone else has seen a similar case as this.
Dr. Shubhangi, you want to say something?
No, I think it was presented well and managed well. Couldn't think of any other thing which could have been done. But since the hypotropia was about 25 prism diopters, you needed to do even the inferior oblique along with the superior oblique which was placed. Otherwise, the case was managed well.
Would you have done just a superior oblique in the beginning, because, or would you have
for doing an inferior oblique recession in the second stage?
Okay.
That just attached an superior oblique to where it was, and then done an LR recession, and then waited for the result.
Yes, normally we normally see not normal. We have seen rare cases of superior oblique absent tendon. We do not sometimes we go in and we see that there's an absent superior oblique. This is very rare.
Yes.
I think there's a question from Dr. Shashikant. What he says is that would you do also like a MRI to rule out a bilateral SO palsy?
Yeah, so we could have done, it was not done pre-operative, post-operatively we could have done, because the other eye superior oblique was also lax. Maybe the attachment was not there, but I'm not sure if the current MRI which is available with us would be able to differentiate whether the little bit of attachment from the superior rectus was beyond superior rectus and going to the temporal side, or it was nasal. So even if I'm not sure. We can do it. It's a very recently operated case. I've not followed him on because of the COVID crisis, but it's in the pipeline. We would like to do a MRI and find out what has happened. Other thing which I was thinking retrospective, I could have resected a segment of the superior oblique and then attached it. So that could have given a little bit of a brown kind of an effect on table brown, and maybe IO would not have been done in that case. So this is another thing which I was thinking could have been done. But since it was not very lax after detaching it, and neither it was too tight, I was not sure how is the contractility of the muscle, how much would resection work. So IO was a better choice, and probably reversible also, thinking like that. So I was very scared that whether I'll be able to go back and reverse anything of that superior oblique, because there was the perimuscular tissue had definitely been kind of compromised during the first surgery itself.
Yeah, there's a question whether the superior oblique tuck could have been an option. I don't think so. Dr. Shubhangi, would you agree with that? I don't think so.
I don't think so, because there wasn't any attachment of superior oblique only. So the best thing we could have done, as Shailaja says, that we could have resected a part of that tendon and then sutured to where it would have been. To Shashikant's comment, the V exotropia present also suggests an bilateral involvement. Though it could be a masked bilateral involvement, the other eye interaction is masked. Presence of V tells that it is a bilateral involvement.
Shailaja, please stop the share. And so
I have stopped it already.
okay. So I forgot to introduce Shailaja actually. I think in the hurry-burry of her voice, I think I don't think she needs an introduction actually. She's so bubbly and so very proactive. She's a colleague and she is part of the pediatric ophthalmology and strabismus department and neuro-ophthalmology department at Shroff. She's in charge of the genetic clinic at Shroff Hospital. So any genetic cases, please contact her. Okay, so we have ended the session. I think it was a very nice presentation by both the speakers. I thank you so much. I think we have learned so much from both of you.
Thank you, Dr. Suma. It was a wonderful interactive session. Learned.
Thanks, Suma.
Yes.
Shailaja wants to say something.
I want to ask questions. My questions will never be over. One question, actually, Dr. Shetty raised this comment here that the exaggerated FDT or the traction test, how many of us have seen that in A patterns, the SO is tight?
Yes, in fact, we discussed this, no, Dr. Shubhangi? We discussed this, that you can comment. Yeah.
There are cases of resolved browns, not active, but and in such cases, the patient I showed, my A esotropia patient, the force junction was tight. And so when the force junction is tight, it makes sense to release the muscle than do other procedures.
Yeah, but how much percentage? Because in my whatever minimal cases I have done, in A pattern per se, I have not found it to be tight. I have found it mostly in SO Brown syndrome. So will it?
Can't say in
percentage would you say of your A pattern would have a tight SO overaction, tight SO?
Yes, very less.
No, I have not seen that often.
Right. So we cannot base our management on a tightness of the SO for A patterns as such. And last thing to Dr. Laila Mohan, ma'am, how do you prevent cheese wiring of that small band, silicon band for the expander? There is a chance that
cheese wiring doesn't usually happen because it is a firm silicon band. So cheese wiring doesn't happen if you are taking it well inside the edges, unless you cut through during surgery. It doesn't happen.
So is it like you take a bigger bite or?
Usually if you are planning for a 6 millimeter one, I take 1 millimeter on either side. So you take about 1.5 millimeter inside the edges of the band. Okay. So it doesn't cut through. Sometimes if it is too much towards the edge, then when you pull, maybe it will come out, especially because you're using a non-absorbable 50 proline, the needle is very large. So you have to give a small margin for that also. So 6 millimeter means you may have to take about 8 millimeters of the band, 1 millimeter this side and that side, and then take reasonably well into the inside. The edges you can take. It doesn't cut through.
What I do is I take a suture on one side. I use 50 Ethibond. And then after taking the suture on one side, I measure whatever the distance I want to do, whatever. So if it has to be done at 7, then we mark 7 on the spacer from there and then take a second round of suture and then cut the remaining band.
I measure well beforehand and cut it. But
thank you so much. I think the discussions will never end because superior oblique is, we have to keep doing, and the cases still fox us so many times, and every time we have to keep a watch. But I think good clinical decisions, good clinical evaluations. And yes, Sobita also has a question. Okay.
My face turn is still there. Why is the face turn in that case?
Question is there. I thought
I
it was,
wanted to comment on that also. I felt there was some degree of tilt also.
There is a very small face turn, but why was the face turn there when there is superior oblique and A pattern? Why wasn't there a tilt or chin up?
Something
when there is it is documented then that when there is an overaction of the superior oblique, and if there is an asymmetrical one, there can be hypertropia. I mean face turn towards the just to avoid
We
hypertropia.
explained it as that there was lateral incompetence more in the lateral left gaze had less and right gaze had more, and possibly that's why she was taking a right face turn, but she had BSV, so this explanation is also controversial.
And your patient also had a developmental delay.
No, not this patient. It was the other patient. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the speakers, also Dr. Shailaja and Dr. Sovita for an excellent cases they have presented. And also Dr. Shubhangi and Dr. Laila for thank you so much. The videos were perfect and excellent. Thank you all the participants for, oh, there's more questions coming in. And Dr. Shashikant has, how would you measure incompetence he's asking. So how did you measure the incompetence he's asking? So I think you can discuss with him. Because we are short of time, we have another webinar very soon. So I think we'll have to give the Zoom. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Suma and the whole team. Thank you so much, the Shroff team, for this active. It is sort of meeting each other also during the COVID times.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot again.
Stay safe and stay healthy.
Leave now.
Thank you, everyone.
All the best to everyone.